Half of Europe died in just 5 years. For 600 years, we blamed the wrong thing. And the truth? It's even more terrifying than the legend. This is the science record. And today, we're uncovering what really happened during the deadliest pandemic in human history. October 1347. A fleet of trading ships arrives in Sicily from the Black Sea. The sailors are sick, covered in black boils, burning with fever. Most are already dead. The harbor master orders the ships to leave immediately. But it's too late. Within days, people in the city start dying. Within weeks, entire neighborhoods are empty. Within months, the disease has spread across Italy, into France, through Spain. By 1352, half of Europe's population is dead. 200 million people, gone. They called it the Black Death. And for 600 years, we got the science completely wrong. Let's start with what people believed at the time. Medieval doctors had a theory. Bad air. They called it miasma. The idea was that disease came from foul-smelling vapors rising from rotting matter, swamps, or dead bodies. So when the plague hit, doctors told people to avoid bad smells. They carried bouquets of flowers. They burned incense. Some wore those famous bird-beak masks stuffed with herbs and spices, thinking it would filter out the poisonous air. It didn't work. Obviously, others blamed divine punishment. The plague was God's wrath for humanity's sins. Entire groups of religious flagellants wandered from town to town, whipping themselves bloody, begging for forgiveness. That didn't work either. Some blamed the alignment of planets. Some blamed earthquakes releasing toxic gases from the earth. Some blamed Jewish communities, leading to horrific massacres across Europe. None of it was true. None of it stopped the plague, because they were looking in completely the wrong direction. Here's what was actually happening, and it starts with a bacterium most people have never heard of. Yersinia pestis. That's the scientific name. It's a rod-shaped bacterium, and it's one of the most lethal pathogens ever to infect humans. But here's the thing. Yersinia pestis doesn't spread through bad air. It doesn't care about planetary alignments. It spreads through fleas. Specifically, fleas that live on rats. Here's how it worked. Rats were everywhere in medieval cities, living in grain stores, in homes, in the streets. And those rats carried fleas. When a flea bit an infected rat, it would ingest the bacteria along with the blood. Inside the flea's gut, Yersinia pestis multiplies rapidly. It forms a thick biofilm that actually blocks the flea's digestive system. The flea is starving, but it can't digest anything, so it bites more frequently, desperately trying to feed. And every time it bites, it regurgitates thousands of bacteria directly into the wound. When the rat dies from the infection, the fleas jump to a new host. Often, that new host was human. Once Yersinia pestis enters the human body, it moves fast. The bacteria travel through the lymphatic system to the nearest lymph node. There, they multiply explosively. The lymph node swells, massively. These swellings are called buboes, and they're where the disease gets its other name, bubonic plague. The buboes appear in the groin, armpits, or neck, depending on where the flea bite occurred. They can grow to the size of an apple. They turn black as the tissue dies. The pain is excruciating. But that's just the beginning. As the bacteria multiply, they release toxins that trigger a massive immune response. Fever spikes to 104, 105 degrees Fahrenheit. The victim experiences chills, headaches, muscle pain, vomiting. In about 60% of untreated cases, the bacteria enter the bloodstream. This is called septicemic plague. The toxins cause blood vessels to leak. Small hemorrhages appear under the skin, turning it black and purple. This is where the name Black Death comes from. The bacteria also release endotoxins that trigger disseminated intravascular coagulation. Blood clots form throughout the body, cutting off circulation to fingers, toes, nose, ears. The tissue dies and turns black. Gangrene sets in, and in about 10% of cases, the bacteria reach the lungs. This is pneumonic plague, and it's the most deadly form. Once in the lungs, Yersinia pestis causes severe pneumonia. The victim coughs up blood filled with billions of bacteria. And here's where it gets truly terrifying. Pneumonic plague can spread directly from person to person through respiratory droplets. No fleas needed. Just breathing near an infected person could kill you. Pneumonic plague kills in 2 to 3 days without treatment. The mortality rate is nearly 100%. So why was the Black Death so devastating? Why did it kill so many people so quickly? First, medieval cities were perfect breeding grounds. Narrow streets, no sanitation, garbage and human waste in the streets, rats everywhere, dense populations living in close quarters. Second, people had no immunity. Yersinia pestis had been circulating in Central Asia for centuries, but it hadn't reached Europe in living memory. European populations had never been exposed. They had no antibodies, no resistance. Third, the response made it worse. When people got sick, families would care for them at home. Close contact, perfect for transmission. When someone died, the body would lie in the house for days before burial. More exposure. And when people fled the cities to escape the plague, they brought it with them to the countryside. The disease followed the trade routes, the pilgrimage paths, the refugee movements. Fourth, there were actually 3 forms of plague circulating simultaneously. Bubonic plague from flea bites, septicemic plague in the bloodstream, and pneumonic plague in the lungs, each one feeding the others. The death toll was staggering. In some cities, 60% of the population died. In Florence, 75,000 people died out of a population of 120,000. In Siena, the population dropped from 50,000 to 20,000. Entire villages were abandoned. Fields went unplanted. The economy collapsed. The social order broke down. There weren't enough living people to bury the dead. Mass graves were dug outside cities. Bodies were thrown in by the hundreds, by the thousands. In London, one burial pit contained more than 2,000 bodies. And through it all, no one knew what was causing it. The miasma theory persisted. The religious explanations persisted. The scapegoating persisted. It wasn't until 1894, 547 years after the Black Death began, that a scientist named Alexander Yersin finally identified the bacterium. He was studying an outbreak of plague in Hong Kong when he isolated the organism from the buboes of victims. The bacterium was named Yersinia pestis in his honor. And it wasn't until the early 1900s that scientists confirmed the flea-rat-human transmission cycle. Paul-Louis Simond, a French scientist, proved that fleas were the vector by conducting experiments with rats and fleas in India. Finally, after 6 centuries, we understood what had killed 200 million people. Here's the truly sobering part. Yersinia pestis still exists. It's still out there. There are still occasional outbreaks of plague in parts of Africa, Asia, and even the United States. But today, we have something medieval Europe didn't have. Antibiotics. Streptomycin, gentamicin, doxycycline. If caught early, plague is treatable. The mortality rate drops from 60% to less than 10%. We also have public health infrastructure, sanitation, pest control, disease surveillance. When cases appear, they're isolated and treated quickly. The Black Death couldn't happen today. Not on that scale, not with that death toll. But it's a reminder of how fragile civilization is, how quickly disease can spread, how important it is to understand the science. 200 million people died because we didn't understand bacteria, because we didn't understand disease transmission, because we blamed bad air and divine punishment instead of looking for the real cause. It took 600 years to figure out the truth. 600 years of recurring plague outbreaks. 600 years of preventable deaths. The Black Death changed everything. It reshaped Europe's economy, its social structure, its art, its religion. It's one of the defining events in human history. And now you know what really happened. Not bad air. Not divine wrath. Not planetary alignment. A bacterium. A flea. A rat. And a population with no immunity and no understanding of how disease spreads. If you found this fascinating, subscribe to the Science Record. Next week, we're exploring what happens to your brain as you age and why it's not what you think. Thanks for watching, and remember, we only defeated the Black Death because we finally understood the science. This is the Science Record. See you next week.